Welcome to my basement, everybody. We've got a pretty fantastic way to wrap up this incredible year of 2023. The general manager at Blizzard, is it Blizzard Activision or just Blizzard, do you say?
We say ABK, or Activision Blizzard King.
Activision Blizzard King. Rod Fergusson is joining me. How you doing, Rod? It's great to see you.
I'm good. It's nice to see you, too. It's nice to be up in Vancouver.
Yeah, you messaged me over Twitter. You still call it Twitter?
Yeah, I do, actually.
Me too.
I can't do the X thing.
Me neither.
Every time I see X.com, I always think of the game. And so I'm like, oh, there's a message on X.com. And I'm like, wait.
XCOM.
Yeah.
Yes. I wonder if that was a nod right from, because he's a big gamer, that guy.
Well, but the X thing goes way back to PayPal. There's a whole history to the renaming that you can get into, which is just like whatever.
Right. Well, Rod joins me, and after having this incredible year with Diablo IV, and he reached out and said, I'm coming up to Vancouver because, if you don't know, he used to run the Coalition up here, worked on the Gears franchise for a number of years, actually left the Gears franchise, came back to the Gears franchise.
That's right, yeah.
And then took the opportunity to move to Southern California and start to work on Diablo.
Right.
I want to talk about Diablo IV, of course, but let's get into a little bit of that decision.
Sure.
Because, I know that Gears is near and dear to your heart. Were you with Gears right from the very beginning of Gears?
Well, I came in 2005,
Okay.
and so there was about a year and a half left of that project. It took a long time to get Gears 1 out.
Yeah.
So I was in sort of for the last year and a half of it. But then, every game that came afterwards, 1, 2, 3, Judgment, and the remaster, and 4 and 5, and Tactics, and Gears Pop, even the mobile. So it was 15 years of Gears of War, and I touched all of it, so it was fun.
How did you make the decision to leave? I mean, that's your baby in a way, right?
It is. It was really, really hard, actually. It was really hard. I think part of it was, we had gotten to a certain point with Gears where we were going to change engines and change technology, and it was going to take a long time for the next game to come out. And I just sort of, I like shipping games, and so there was okay, I can sit here for the next 5 years and not ship anything.
Right.
And I'm feeling pretty comfortable. I've solved these problems. I got to where we were. And the idea to be able to work on another of my favorite franchises of all time, which is Diablo. And, Blizzard was having some struggles that I was like, oh, I could probably help there.
Right.
And the work at that scale, the scale that their games come in, basically it takes 3 Gears of Wars to make one Diablo, because you're exclusive on Xbox. And so at that time, you don't have the same reach that Diablo does on PC and PlayStation and Xbox. And so I was like, oh, I haven't done something at that scale before. And so the idea of having a new challenge and the idea of just shipping. So, I've been there in March, it'll be 4 years, but we've shipped 3 games. And so I was going back and going, in the last 9 years, I've shipped 8 games. And so this idea of okay, it's going to take 5 years to make another game. And I'm like, oh, that pace is so slow. What else could I ship? Is there something else to ship?
Do you think that's a common issue with veteran developers? Because there was a period, I think about the PlayStation 3 and Naughty Dog all the time.
Right.
And they shipped 3 Uncharted games
right.
on that platform. And Last of Us.
Right.
Which just seems impossible now. Do you think that that's if you've been in the business for a while, is it excruciatingly slow to get these things out?
Yeah, I think it can be. I think it depends on when I was shipping BioShock Infinite, we'd have Ken Levine and I would have late night conversations around what was going on with the project, and he said, I like making games, or I love making games, but I don't like shipping them.
Right.
And I was like, well, that's funny, because that's kind of the opposite for me. Is I like making them, but I love shipping them.
Right.
And so the notion of sort of new IPs or new games taking 7 years, I think it means also something differently when you get to be my age, where there was a story with Phil went when I was working at Xbox. Phil Spencer went and was touring, I think, Japan, and me with designers. And he had dinner with one of them, and they said, Phil, I've got 3 games left in me. Do you want one of them? Kind of thing.
Wow.
And when he came back and told that story, I think it was 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'd maybe just become 50 years old, and that idea of I've got 3 left in me, I was like, oh God, do I need to start thinking like that? And so that idea of oh, hey, I was sitting here now, I'm 55, and go, oh, well, then your next game's 7 years long. I'm like, oh God, really? Like that. And so it's that pace. But I think down when Diablo is really more of a live service now, and so that we're shipping a new season every 3 months. We got we have an expansion coming up this year. Diablo Immortal on mobile is they ship every 2 weeks, and then we just Diablo Immortal, we just launched our biggest update ever in December. So we're still, when you're part of that live service, you're kind of always shipping, so it has that energy.
Yeah, I guess so, right? I mean, that is definitely something that I recognize. I mean, I haven't had time to get into all of the live service content. Right. And the game asks me all the time, do you want to play this? Do you want to play that? It's like, right. I'm still playing through the stuff, man. And this weekend was amazing, by the way, because I knew this interview was coming, so I was all Diablo. I apologize to my family. I was sitting on the couch with the Steam Deck and the PlayStation Portal. I was like, I was really grooving on the game.
Oh, good.
It must feel amazing to have this out there,
right.
But it must also feel like a lot of pressure to not be finished.
Yeah, it's hard. It's definitely different to do a live service game. Like there's a different pressure to that always shipping mentality, but there's also a different expectation from fans, and that's been a bit of adjustment for me, where you get people who are like, "Hey, this thing, you're not doing enough for me. I just finished. I've got 350 hours in your game, and there's nothing to do." And you're like, what are you talking about right now?
350?
You're like, you just played a lot.
The answer is in your question.
Yeah. So that sort of expectation is hard to, like, the live service fans. And I know this from my time. Other than Diablo, if you go back, my Xbox #1 game every year was always Destiny 2.
I saw that.
And so that notion of, I was that player. I was like, okay, what else are we doing? What else are we doing? And so now with Diablo IV, it's that same sort of thing. It's like, okay, what are we trying to do? And so we had, the Abattoir Zir, which is a new event for people who have reached level 100, or we have our Midwinter Blight, which is our holiday seasonal event for people who just want to have fun, running around killing like weird snowmen and stuff. And, and so it's just been, so it's just kind of getting used to that pace. But the hard part is just doing it sustainably. Like when you're always shipping, you can really light your team on fire and just kind of keep them on fire, and that's not the way to do it. And so you have to kind of staff appropriately and grow appropriately and have the right processes and pipelines, and so that you can go and get into a sort of a cadence that the team can kind of keep up with.
Was the Gears sort of esports evolution training for you? Was that kind of understanding that people were and all the multiplayer with Gears, was that kind of great, like an on-ramp for you to be able to appreciate what to do with a live game?
Yeah, it was a lot of learning. I think I think I'd learned, like, I was doing it wrong on Gears, when we were trying to do a lot of the stuff around the shop and stuff that we did in Gears, and trying to create that sort of sense of live service with multiplayer. When you realize what else has to go into it. We had just a very small team on it. And so it's the same what has always been true for a while on Gears, was like multiplayer is a pretty small team because the campaign was so big that, you need a really large team.
Yeah.
And so really having to adjust that balance from the 80-20 to 50-50. And then now where we're like, okay, like we're having to sort of move the whole team over to this sort of sense of live service with expansions and seasons and the shop and the battle pass. There's just, I always put it out as they look like swim lanes, we call it swim lanes, and just the amount of parallel development is amazing. And because I was trying to say to the team, like, right now you're kind of feeling like you're working on one thing. I'm working on Diablo 4, but after we ship, we're going to be working on the live game, seasons and battle pass, the shop, the expansion, and they have to be done in parallel because it takes longer to develop than it takes to play.
Right.
So a 3-month season takes 6 months to make.
Right.
And so you need to be doing season 1 and season 2 at the same time. You need to be doing expansion 1, and if you're going to work on another one, you might be starting that as well.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, hey, you're going from this one thing to now you're doing 6 things all at once, and it's a real sort of transition for the team.
You sound like a showrunner.
Exactly what it feels
sound like a TV showrunner, right? And like, do you know the end of this?
Oh,
do you plan for that? Do you plan for, like, I don't know how the end comes to a live service game.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you plan it out. It's kind of dictated by the players.
Yeah.
Because you put out, when you're doing business planning, you're always doing what they call LRP, or long range planning, which generally is about a 5-year plan.
Okay.
And we always revisit that every year because depending what the players are doing and how they're showing up or not, then you're going to change your plan, because you can say like, oh, if everybody comes back for the live service, we can do X, but if they don't, then we can do Y. And then, so what's going to happen is as each season happens, you get actuals, you know, you have a theory, and then you test that theory. And if it's right, then maybe you keep that plan going. If it's wrong, then you start to pivot and look at new plans.
Right. And I guess a lot of that was, you know, spoken to by the long-term success of Blizzard's previous games. Like people continue to play StarCraft and continue to play Diablo II, you know, and get online and sort of love these games for decades.
Totally.
And so you knew if you played your cards right as a team, you would be able to keep people in this space for a long time.
Yeah, and it was part of the Blizzard philosophy when I got there, because one of the things when I did Diablo II Resurrected was, can I shut down Diablo II Classic?
Right.
And, you know, the president at the time was like, no, that has to keep going, and so you have to sort of respect that original purchase. So it was like, oh, wow, okay, we're going to keep all this stuff going. But really, you know, when you look at what we're doing with Diablo IV, it's really kind of looking at the 10 years. It's been about 11 years for Diablo III. Yeah. And kind of, I don't think we met players' needs with Diablo 3. We did seasons, like we're on season 29, but they were pretty small, and we only did sort of like, well, we did Reaper of Souls, but then we did the Necromancer, which is a small thing. Yeah. But it just felt like the community was there and people wanted more. And that's really what Diablo 4 was meant to be. It was supposed to be hey, we know you're out there. And we saw them show up at launch. It was the biggest launch Blizzard's ever had. Yeah. And now it's trying to be like, okay, how do we keep that community satisfied with more and more content all the time?
That's awesome. Let's talk about launching this game. What was the ramp up to that like for the company and for the team? Were you guys prepared for all of the work, and were you prepared for the reception? And did it feel good going into that launch cycle, or was it a lot of stress? How was it for you guys?
It was good. I think there was some stress. Part of it was, again, I was saying we do things in parallel. So having to build season 1 at the same time we were shipping. Yeah. And that was the hard part, because when we did season 1, people would look at us and go, hey, didn't you learn anything from the feedback we gave you after launch? And we're like, it was made at the same time. Like, we didn't know. And so there was definitely, you know, in trying to, when you're dealing with
Kudos to your team, by the way, for the transparency there and for taking the bull by the horns and just speaking from the heart with the fan base. I mean, that's lessons there too.
For sure. That was one of the big things there at the live service lessons, and why we started things like the campfire chat, which was to be a more casual conversation. Totally. And trying to be more transparent, because there was just, again, you can get into, if you're not talking, then people have different expectations. And we were trying to say like, hey, some of the stuff's being built in parallel. We hear you, but it takes time to react to that feedback. Yeah. And you know, and for season 1, we kind of didn't quite do it the way we should have. We were more focused. Like, it's very easy in a game that's so complex as Diablo, when you got 5 classes with all the skills and the shared open world, and the depth there is crazy. No one person can have it all in their head.
It's amazing. Like, that's what I was thinking of when I was playing this. Is like, do you even know what's in your game?
Exactly.
Like, there's so much stuff that happens. Like the transition from biome to biome in real time. It's like, Jesus Christ, there is so many little intricate details in this thing. Yeah. How do you wrap your head around the whole of it?
Yeah, and that's what I find funny is like people at Twitter will come at me about like, hey, how dare you make this change to the sorcerer? I'm like, I didn't even know we made that change to the sorcerer. Like, let's be fair. Like, there's a lot of people making a lot of changes in real time here. Yeah. You know, but yeah, it's but getting, you know, sometimes you can get focused on balance and not fun. Like, you can be like, okay, everything has to be at the same level, and you're really striving for fairness. And the thing about a Diablo game is it's those overpowered moments that you feel like you're cheating, or that you fool the development team, or you're taking advantage of some exploit it feels really, really fun. Yeah. And so that's what we've had to really try to embrace. So now, like in season 2, you know, Ball Lightning Sork is ridiculous, but we're going like, just let them have fun. Yeah. We'll deal with it later, you know. And same with Hammer of the Ancients Barbarian. Is it's just gonna like, okay, fine, they're gonna exploit it a little bit, but it's fine. We'll fix it next season.
You know, we visited LucasArts when they were making Force Unleashed, and they had the whole chart map of how the player felt through the game. Oh, nice. And it was like, you know, you're picking up your powers, you're getting more comfortable, and then boom, you're so freaking powerful, you know. And I hadn't, as a player, I've never made games like that, so I just, you know, consume it and I think about it and I talk about it. But it was really interesting to see it all play out like that. And I think you're so right. Like, you really need to give that power agency back to us so that we can just, especially after a boss. Like I played Duriel not too long ago.
Oh, yeah.
I never experienced Duriel in Diablo II.
Right.
Yeah, I'm ashamed to say, but I did not
Oh,
like
that's
this.
pretty. Okay, yeah.
I did not like this Duriel. He was a pain in the ass. I was like, I couldn't move around all the damn holes that he kept making. No, I kept getting trapped in corners. It really pissed me off. But I felt so good after.
Right.
And that's the balance, right?
That's the magic. Yeah. You're finding the challenge, because if it's too easy, then people like, it's not fun because it's too easy. But if it's too hard, same thing. And so you have to find, like, the thing for me is when you play Diablo, it's supposed to be sort of these cresting waves where you're sort of, you think about it as being either behind or ahead of the power curve. And so you start off slightly behind, and so you're working, and all of a sudden you pick up this weapon that gives you this great damage boost, and now, like, I'm king of the world, like, you're super overpowered, and then you'll level up a few times, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm starting to fall behind again, and then you're like, oh, I get another thing, and I get to come back. And so you're sort of always riding this sort of progression wave through the game, which is really fun.
Talk to me about, because I don't do this, and the reason why I don't do this, I don't buy the weapons and the armor from the shop, and I know the shop is a huge integral part, and the super fans love being able to customize their character and all that stuff.
Right.
But you get so much loot in Diablo games, and I feel like if I buy, I'm gonna find something that's better than anything that I buy. I mean, so. Right. How do you manage that? Is it just purely cosmetic? Is it purely just about expression, and it's got nothing to do with the power of these things?
No, not at all. Yeah, Diablo IV is only cosmetic.
Yeah.
And so it's really about that. It's about sort of making your own fantasy. And I kind of get, as I did in Destiny 2, I'm the same way in Diablo 4. You get this sort of power fantasy about something you want, like, oh, I'm doing a Thorns, necro, and so that I go and find the spikiest armor I can find, and I'll buy that. Or I'm doing an electric sork, and then I'll look for like the most electric looking armor that I can buy. And so there's some really great stuff to find, and my brother, I was just playing with him last night, and he's a ice sork, and he, through what he's earned in the game, he looks great. He's got like the earmuff thing, and he's got the winter dress and all that stuff. It looks great.
So he didn't buy any of that.
He didn't buy any.
He just found all of it.
Yeah, it's because you can earn a lot of stuff, like you said. In Diablo,
I'm constantly, it's the game. You're just finding all this cool stuff, and it's
Totally.
like, okay, buy a cool thing, because you get the next cool thing. So
Totally.
I've never had that compulsion. I guess you have, and do you have the stats on that, on how many people do want to buy the things?
Yeah, and there's definitely people there that want to do that, and then people like having sort of this, again, they want a specific look. But what I really like about our system is that it's not limited to one look. Like there are games out there that when you buy a skin, that's your character. Like you're buying a character, you're not buying a skin. If
Fortnite.
Fortnite. Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Which
is working out pretty good.
Yeah,
for
they
them.
did all right.
Yeah.
They did all right. It's a good model, I guess. But for us, like, we like the idea that you can buy something, but then you can mix and match. And so, like, there'll be times where I'll be using the sword that's glowing from one skin, and I'll use the helmet from another skin. And like, so even within the cosmetics you buy, you can mix and match. And so you can even further customize your look. And then we have, like, find a cool matching mount, or a mount that you like, that kind of stuff. Like my Necro has to have the spectral ghost horse, that that kind of stuff. And my Sork has the World of Warcraft, mount, because it has all this blue light that comes off of it when it charges. It's great.
That's awesome. I think Ed Fries was working on a Warcraft thing where you could print the characters.
The figures, that's right.
Yeah. Like, how far are we away from that? Like, I feel like that should be the next step. You buy all the stuff, and then you go, boop, and it gets sent to you.
That's true.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be amazing. Yeah, we were close. The real time. I mean, you have to imagine now, like, the real time 3D printing that's going on. That's got to be really, really close.
I mean, like, the industry is moving away from physical. You know, there's no way to. But that might be like the last bastion of collectability.
Yeah. Well, you have like all the great, like, because we have a partnership with McFarlane.
Right.
And so you have all the great, like, classes in Necro and Druid and all that stuff. But the idea that, like, oh, I want mine, and like, and then you get yours. It's cool.
Awesome. Well, you know what? I think we should have started with this a little bit, but let's break down sort of the structure of Diablo 4. Okay. I'm going to assume some people may know you from Gears, have never played Diablo, not many, but let's get into it a little bit. How did you guys set up Diablo 4, and what makes it different from the previous Diablo experiences?
I mean, when you think, I like to use a simple formula when I describe Diablo 4.
Yep.
It's basically the dark tone of Diablo 1, when Diablo 1 is sort of this cult classic and don't let my parents know I'm playing it kind of game.
Yep.
And
where it rains blood.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so the mainstream is when you look at the Walking Dead and Game of Thrones and all that stuff. Like darkness is mainstream now. It's not the thing that's hidden away. And so it's this idea of hey, people really want and missed that tone in Diablo, because Diablo 3 was a little more mainstream.
Yeah, it was like a comic
more
book version of it.
You know, people always like, well, there's purple in Diablo 3. And you're like, yeah, I get it. So the dark tone of Diablo 1 meets the progression of Diablo 2. So that idea of a persistent progression through a skill tree that has dependencies, and with the visceral combat of Diablo 3, the high-speed combat and the tactical combat of 3. And then 4 brings its own sort of the shared open world, and then this sort of notion of the most player choice that a Diablo game is, from the character creation to whether you want to play solo with friends, whether you want to do the campaign in or out of order, because it's a non-linear campaign.
Right.
And so you can choose to play chapter 3 first, and then, or act 3 first, and go back to play act 1 after, kind of thing. And so it's really about that, those sorts of, so that dark tone plus progression plus combat plus innovation.
And kind of a totally different experience depending on the class that you take.
Yeah, so there's 5 classes, and so you get to choose whether and because I find everybody has a sort of power fantasy. Like what is it you'd ever want to be? And maybe it's because, like for me, when I read the Shannara books, the idea of being a druid with 2 Black Panthers or whatever, that idea of being part of nature and having nature magic has been, is something that's really cool to me. And so when you go like, oh, I can roll a druid, or my main class is a necromancer. And I joke because you always have minions around. It's like it's a management simulator. And so I like to delegate my combat to skeletons to go
not
fight.
Far from the source material.
Exactly.
Except you don't work with skeletons.
Yeah, exactly. And so and so there's a sork, which gives you that magic feel of a sorcerer or sorceress. And then you have the rogue, which is an agility class.
I started with the rogue, and then I moved over to a sorcerer, and I played a little necromancer. I haven't done the barbarian.
Okay.
And what's the other one?
The druid.
And the druid. I haven't done the druid yet.
Yeah, I got Phil Spencer just started he got his druid to level 100 this season.
Amazing.
But I kept pushing him like, go poison. So every time we played, he'd be like end up tweaking his class. And now it's funny, he's like taking coworkers through. Like last night he jumped on and was like, hey, I'm carrying a coworker through the capstone. Can you tell me this thing? And I'm like, sure. And so it was really funny to see, not only has he gone from being a player, he's now becoming a guide to other Xbox employees.
I mean, that's commitment.
Exactly.
That's time. And dude, like this year, talk to me about this year. How stupid and insane this year is. Like Diablo IV launched, when it launched, it was like, Jesus, how can all of these games be out at the same time?
I know. Trust me, I know. I'm still shaking I don't know how Diablo IV launches and doesn't get nominated in the RPG category. I'm like, there's so many RPGs that didn't even make the category at the Game Awards. So I'm like, okay, that speaks to like what's going on this year. Yeah, it's a crazy year. Like you tend to want to say, oh, I hope it's a quiet year. Like Gears 1, when it launched in 2006, it was a quiet year, and we were like, oh, this is great for us because it was so we had no real competition that year. Yeah. But this year it's been crazy. But I mean, that's awesome for the gamers. There's just so many really great games out there to play.
And I think games, especially live service games, I think there's a tail to all of these now.
Sure.
It's not a weekend and it's done. I think it's harder maybe to break out in the noise. It's harder for people to find the time, I think, honestly, more than anything, to play all of this stuff.
Yeah, I just got my Xbox summary, and I had played 420 hours of Diablo 4 so far. Yeah. I've done another dozen since then. So, like, it's just, you're right. It's finding the time, and the backlogs are just growing deeper and deeper because, I was heavy into Cyberpunk with my Netrunner, and then Season 2 Diablo 4 came along, so I switched away from that. Yeah. I'm like, I got to go back before I forget how to play Cyberpunk, and I haven't started Baldur's Gate yet. So like, there's just so much stuff out there.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know, 15 hours or so into Baldur's Gate. So like, there's so much to play and so much to do.
Yeah.
Was that a bit nerve-wracking for you guys, or did you know that you had the brand appeal and you knew that the fans would be there? And where were the fans? Were they mostly on PC, or were they on PS5 and Xbox kind of? Like, how did it break out for you guys?
I mean, everybody showed up the way we had hoped, but Blizzard is kind of historically has been more of a PC-centric company.
Whoopi's still mad at you guys, or is that worked out?
Apparently she's playing, so she found a way to get it to run on her Mac. So I was like, she's not mad at us anymore, so that's good. But yeah, I mean, we still have our PC legacy, and so there's a lot of the PC players did show up. And it's part of just we have a slightly older audience because we've been around for 26 years, when Diablo 1 shipped. And so that was one of the funny things that when I first joined Gears of War back in 2005, I met with the Xbox marketing team, and they're like, all right, your demographic is like 18 to 22-year-old males, and so you have to really focus. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then I show up at Blizzard in 2020, and they're like, okay, your demographic is like 35 to 45-year-old men, and I'm like, what's just happening right now? Like, what just happened? Like they're aging with you, and like, oh, okay, good to know. So I mean, and then you see that like one part of what we tried to do with Diablo 4 is to try to make it more appealing to a younger audience, and so we actually did things that we probably, specifically for that. Like we started a TikTok account, and so there, Diablo's on TikTok. We got Halsey, and with
that performance was amazing at the Game Awards last year.
And having her partner up with Suga from BTS, like that was all a focus on, okay, can we reach a broader audience? And so that was,
and you got the View audience, which is amazing.
Exactly. I had no idea how hardcore Whoopi is.
That was amazing.
She's so hardcore. So yeah, no, it's been really interesting to see. But no, we were, when you're shipping, you're kind of looking at like what's happening in the weeks around. We weren't really looking at the year. Yeah. And so it was really like we picked our spot. Generally speaking, like the process that I run is we do something called a 1 year out. Which is basically, okay, you're about 1 year from shipping, and so this is when you commit. Like, and if you can't commit to a date 1 year out, then you're not 1 year out.
Right.
And so that was part of our thing. So we kind of knew, okay, this is the date we're shooting for, and so it was like, okay, just watch or look around. Is anybody coming into our window? And as long as nobody came into the window, we were okay. And the sooner you can tell people, then they can stay out of your window potentially, right?
Well, but now the window is like days, though.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy with so many games. We were looking at this in mobile, and because of Immortal,
of course,
and they're doing like a game every 2 minutes gets shipped on mobile, and so you're dealing with like 3,000 games get released in a year, and so you're like, where did you show up, right? And the fact that like we were going through the stats, like in terms of global worldwide RPGs, like on mobile, Immortal's number 5. Like that's amazing in a world that ships 3,000 games a year. Right? So we're really happy about like how both games are kind of serving their own individual purpose.
Yeah, I played a little bit of Immortal, and I was impressed by what I played, but I've heard really, really nice things about the game. So the fan base is there.
Yeah, it's a really strong Diablo game, and I know that some of our core came to Immortal and ran into the free-to-play stuff and was like, whoa, what's going on? And so they struggled with it. But for the mobile audience who are used to free-to-play, they've embraced it, and it's been great to see the success that Immortal's had.
Oh, I know this won't happen, but I definitely had this thought because 4 is such an excellent handheld game. It's amazing, and it bums me out that I can't play it on the plane. But
me too.
I love it on the Steam Deck, and it plays beautifully on the PlayStation Portal. It would be amazing on a future Switch if that might happen. But I also thought, because the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max are console systems now, I'm looking at Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil Village on this thing, and Prince of Persia Mirage, I think, is coming to this device.
Nice.
That would be an excellent device for the phone as well. I don't know if that's even something that remotely interests your team, or if that would cannibalize Immortal.
That's something we always talk about, is like, where does Immortal play and where does Diablo 4 play? Especially the two different business models. It's kind of a different type of experience.
Just quite a user base, though.
Yeah, but it's like the thing with D4 is that we don't, like everything, to keep it a secure environment, everything is authenticated on a server.
Right.
And so as soon as you do something like, oh, you can play offline, that means like to go on the plane, you get into the situation where now people could be hacking your server code, or they could be cheating, and then it kind of corrupts your economy or corrupts your game.
Right.
So that's one of the things when people go like, oh, I want to play D4 offline, and we're like, yeah, it's harder to do than you think it is, just because from a security perspective.
Is Diablo done with offline experiences? Is it always going to have this kind of live service attachment?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, we'd look at that, because I'm a player. I have the same desires too. And it's what I like about D2 actually. Like D2R is really fun. Yeah. And the fact that it can play offline is. So when I go on the plane, I play D2R. Yeah. And so
I want to get back to that for sure. And I play D3 on Switch every once in a while.
If you want an interesting challenge. Yeah. So there's a way to play Diablo II Resurrected in a pacifist mode, which is basically you get your paladin, which has a bunch of thorn abilities, and you can basically somebody has beaten the game without ever
Just
attacking
blocking everybody?
Yeah, never pressing A, never attacking. It's always just when they hit him, the reflex damage back for the entire game.
Wow.
And so I'm up to Duriel with my pacifist build. I was like, I got to try this. This
You
sounds
can't
great.
beat Duriel as a pacifist.
I think you can.
Oh my God.
I think you can.
That's crazy. That's patience is what that
I know.
is. Yeah.
I know. Duriel's the first challenge in D2 for sure. But yeah, so I don't know. Like offline is hard just because of that stuff of like when you try to encrypt stuff, and our stuff is data mined all the time, as soon as you start putting server tech locally, that just gives them a place to go digging, and then you start to show they have access to a bunch of stuff you don't want them to have access to. So it's just harder to do.
Naughty Dog is all over the news right now because they canceled the Factions Online thing, and they mentioned how expensive it would be and how much of a risk it would be to make a live service experience like this. I just thought through that and started to list out all the live things in a tweet, and I don't have the full, like, you can just keep tweeting forever thing.
Right.
So I'm sure there's tons that I didn't get into, but I was just like, how does anyone break through with the live service? I mean, you know how expensive it is and how tough it is.
Super challenging.
How does a new IP, how would you even risk that at this point? How do you do it?
That's a great question. And that's when I read that, where they said, like, it's kind of one or the other. Like, I totally understood what they were saying. Yeah. Because it is a black hole of content. Like, it is... Like I said, the person who played 350 hours and going like, what's next? And you're like, okay, like it's just you cannot feed that beast fast enough or enough. Yeah. And so you're just running as fast as you can for as long as you can. And it's definitely challenging. I mean, it's super rewarding, but like the idea that they're going to take these, do their sequels while trying to feed this hungry beast. I get where, like, you would have to become what you see what the size of Fortnite became. Yeah. You're talking now development teams of 1,000 and such. And this was my next question to you guys. They have all the user generated content out there now too. So there's thousands and thousands of pieces that people can jump into. That's right.
And then they've just segmented their game into racing and Lego, and they've got the music experience.
Right.
I don't expect you're going to have a rock band version of Diablo IV, although that would be freaking rad. But
heavy metal,
that would be great. Are you guys going to have mods? Are you going to open it up to the community to be able to play with your tools in your sandbox?
I mean, we're in the never say never category. Like we always look at like what are we going to do to kind of continue our the longevity of the game. Yeah. I think right now we're on season 2, so we're still finding our feet, on a bunch of that stuff. And so I think this next little while is still going to be working on those foundational features, because one of the things you have to make sure is you have a solid base that you're building on top of. And we kind of felt like there's still stuff for us to do, especially around itemization. The complexity we have right now, like when a weapon, a piece of loot falls on the ground, the complexity of, is this better? Is it not better? Is it helping my build? Is it not helping my build? There's too much kind of mental math that happens today. Yeah. And so in season 4, we're really looking at how do we simplify that so people can instantly understand that's a great sword and I want that sword, and then I can play with it and make it better. Right. And so we're still building our foundation.
Yeah, you're still tying to the old way of doing it with Diablo. Yeah. But you're right. You could kind of tweak that and make that a little bit instantaneous.
Yeah.
But loot and playing in the inventory is such a big part of the game.
Oh, for sure. Like we don't want to get rid of the notion of being able to like that tweak your build and optimize everything across all your loot. But there's just like I said, there's just a lot of Elon Musk was streaming it on Twitter and on X, and he said something like, "Oh, Diablo is a great game if you love math." And I was just like, "No, that's the worst sort of recommendation you could give to somebody who knows nothing about the game, and all they hear is Elon saying, if you love math, play this game." I'm like, "Oh, there's not enough people out there who love math." So that's what we're trying to get it back to, that instant recognition of like this is better, and just really lean into the loot fantasy.
I'm hearing amazing things about all the new seasonal content, and people are really loving some of the end game components. There is no end game in Diablo 4, but they're loving the new additions to it. But it's been a journey to get to this point, I think.
We keep adding, and that's what people kind of consider the level 50 and beyond the end game is what they call it. And so we're trying to create more and more content for that space. And that was a space we kind of knew when we launched that. It was a thing that you could continue to grow during the live service. So when we were shipping, we were really focused on the campaign and making sure that was really tight. Yep. And that way, and we knew that once you got through the campaign and you were about level 50, we had things like Hell Tide and the Whisper bounty system, and so we had stuff there, but we knew we needed more, but we also knew that we could add that over time as part of the live service. And so that's what we've been doing with what you see now with the blood harvest we have during the season 2 vampire theme, and the abattoir. And we're just constantly trying to find ways to continue to give people, a different way to engage with the game, with their characters.
So you have what's the winter one called?
The Midwinter Blight.
That's just about to launch, or it's launched
already? Launched.
It's launched until January.
Yeah, I think it's like January 2nd or something.
Okay.
And then,
so Merry Christmas.
Yeah, something to do over the Christmas. And then season 3 starts in January 23rd, which we're excited to start talking about soon. And
so we can't talk about it.
We can't talk about it.
Okay. Oh, I tried, guy. I tried.
But it's going to be fun. It's going to be good. It's got another really cool seasonal mechanic. And like I said, we're kind of learning with every season. What's the big thing for season 3 actually is something we're bringing that people really wanted, which is leaderboards. And so we're actually creating a new challenge, a dungeon called the Gauntlet. And it's a fixed challenge. Like, every week there's a gauntlet, and it's the monsters are the same place. Everything is exactly the same. You play it and I play it. It's exactly the same. And they drop this resource when you kill something or you do something, and as you pick it up, you get score. And then people will be able to rank themselves on the leaderboard either against friends or a clan or the whole world. And so, what we saw with Diablo 3, leaderboards is a big deal. Yeah. And even for just sort of like, what's the cool build this season? Oh, I can go look at number 1 on the leaderboard and see how they played. And so that's something we're really excited about bringing in season 3.
They got it right in the 80s in the arcades.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, we got hooked on the leaderboards
exactly.
then. It makes sense still.
Yeah.
So what's going to be the sort of the cadence of seasons? How often are you going to be delivering that?
Yeah, I mean, in the short term, as we're continuing to learn, it's still going to be quarterly. So it's basically a 12-week season.
Okay.
But I mean, it's a plan that's always changing. So we may decide that, seasons need to be changed somewhat, or we want to shorten it. But when you shorten it again, it's that parallel development. You end up having to do certain things around that. So, but we know 12 weeks is a long time, you know, and we can see from the players, like, okay, how long does it take to get through what the people want to get through? And is there enough stuff there for them to do? So we're always revisiting like what our seasonal structure should look like.
Yeah.
But for the short term, it's going to be quarterly.
How do most people play Diablo 4? Are they playing in a group, or are they playing completely alone all the way through? Or how do people?
It's I think like from a majority standpoint, I think mostly solo. But they have what's nice about the shared open world is you have these sort of kind of moments where you meet up with somebody, do something together, and then sort of wave goodbyes, just go your own way.
Yeah.
And so that those
they come in, that's happened to me. I've had people come in and help kick that monster's ass with me, and I'm like, thank you so much.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Like, you go into a local world event, and you're like, oh, this is a little harder than and then in rides the cavalry, and you're like, hey, how's it going? And then you're like,
it's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, and then you sort of, and you don't feel forced, but you could choose to say like, hey, do you want to party up? Or you could say like, thanks, I'll see you later. And that's the thing that we really wanted for choice was like, how do you want to play? Do you want to play in a party of 4? Do you want to play on the couch co-op? Do you want to play solo? And it's really up to you. And we don't, even though we're a shared world, the story parts are instanced so that you can be solo. So there's nobody ruining the story for you or ruining this dungeon for you, because if you want to play them alone or with your party, you can. But there's all those kind of great organic moments of, we are all doing this thing. Like when you go ride off to a world boss and there's like 10 other people there, like, this is going to be cool. It's awesome. Nice to have that.
What's the best way to play it? Because you've played it, I'm sure, in every varietal. What's the most fun way to play Diablo 4?
I like being in a party for sure. I'm even though Diablo's played majority, like there's a lot of PC, I tend to play on console, especially, I mean, I've been with Xbox forever, so I tend to play on a headset in a party on Xbox, and that's my favorite way to play. I'm a big co-op person because of Gears, and I just like playing socially. And so that's, to me, that notion of coming together as a party and working together against a boss and is really the real fun for me. Is
there tactics involved with that? Are you screaming out orders, or is it just hacking and slashing?
Yeah, it's not Diablo. We really wanted to have each class to be able to do it on their own, and so we don't really have that sense of a true support class. So there isn't that like, okay, you're the healer, I'm the damage dealer kind of stuff. Yeah. They all can do damage and they all can kind of heal, but you can get some really interesting. Like my brother is doing this. He has a crazy ice build. And I'm doing this shadow magic, and when two of us fight together, things are just exploding all over the screen. He's freezing them, I'm shattering them, and it's really cool. So no, there's lots of great ways you can work with like barbarian being close range and a rogue being long range. You can mix and match the abilities. Is cool.
The visual effects are insane.
Oh,
And the damage all over the damn place and all of the environmental details.
Right.
I did you push the PS5 and the Xbox Series X to kind of limits? Like, does it ever feel like the machine is just like working to deliver all that stuff?
I mean, when you're in game development, you're always doing that. Like it's that last kind of optimization stuff at the end. You're always pushing, and sometimes you're pushing it because of the hardware, and sometimes you're pushing it because you're doing things that are not efficient, so you need to optimize. But I mean, we're definitely. We wanted to make sure we were running at 60 on PS5 and Series X, and so we really focused on that. But it's been challenging because you're right. Like we have so many visual effects, especially the hardest one is like when you look at my Necromancer has 13 followers.
Yeah.
Like, because I have 6 skeleton warriors, 6 skeleton mages, and a golem. And so if 4 of us all had 13, it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I'm playing on the Steam Deck pretty much alone when I've been playing it so far. But there's so much stuff happening on screen. I'm thinking, how would 4 of these work on this machine? Like, I don't know if that would happen.
That's the challenge. And so things scale as you go. But even with Diablo II Resurrected, we had that same problem. We were going like, oh, wow. Like if we have, because I think the parties were, you could go up to 8 and D2R. And if they were all necromancers with full skeletons, this is going to get hairy. Yeah. So there's some edge case stuff there, but
full vampire hunters.
Yeah. But it's really been a matter of finding the right, it's always a balance between visual quality and performance. Yeah. And so we just know like Diablo has to feel responsive and it has to look great. So we're just going to try to push both.
I guess you can't tell us about any new classes or anything like that. Can't tease about any of that stuff?
It's just that it's a whole new class. So, there's a lot for everybody who's asking for the Paladin, we hear you. We know that's the number one request. But we felt like because the 5 classes that came in D4 were kind of homages to the past, like the rogue is kind of like the Amazon meets the assassin, and barbarian is a classic, and druid's a classic, necro's a classic. So we were just like, okay, we wanted to, at least for this first one, to focus on something wholly new that had never been seen before in a Diablo game, and so that's kind of what the next class is going to be.
Now, you left the Coalition after many years in the Gears pipeline and working with a bunch of really good friends, I would imagine, that you're probably still connected with. Yeah. And you went to Activision Blizzard King. What was the difference in the studios and the philosophies and the way that team members worked?
It's very different. I mean, part of there's a difference working at a Canadian studio anyway, and so I went from working in a Boston studio on Irrational, we're on BioShock Infinite, which you yelled at each other all the time. It was like the aggressiveness of the Boston culture was present in the studio. Let's put it that way. Yep. And so
I always think about that too, like with the way that we tell stories around games. Right. Like I think location is a massive part of how development happens.
Oh, sure.
And we need to kind of address that. The humans that make games, for sure, but also where they are and how they live and absolutely.
Well, there's that thought around studio culture was I always talk about there's kind of 2 sides to it. There's the culture that you want your studio to have, so the posters you put up or the speeches you give and that kind of stuff. But there's the culture that gets reflected back, which is the people you hire. Yeah. And it's always trying to find this balance of can you get those to align properly? And, right. But it was just so funny to go from this very kind of outgoing, aggressive culture into this Canadian Vancouver culture,
collaborative,
which is laid back and so I actually had hired some. I brought a friend of mine from Infinite into the Coalition, and he was rubbing people the wrong way because he was bringing his Boston, how do I work in Boston is how I work here, and I had to sit him down and say hey, that doesn't work here. You're in Canada now. You need to you gotta be a little nicer, and you gotta be a little. You can't just be super blunt and super aggressive. You have to find your way there. And so did it work out? Yeah, he's great. Yeah. He was there for a long time. He recently joined another team, but it's just so that culture has been very different. So then to go to Blizzard, it was another very different culture again, and that was actually the hardest part for me because. I was there. I joined in March 2020 I think it was March 3rd was my first day.
Jesus, right in the middle of, oh my God.
So I had I'm like, they don't, Blizzard tends to promote from within. They don't hire from the outside very much. Yeah. And so I was one of the more senior hires from outside to come in. And so everybody's kind of looking at me like, who's this person who's in charge, but also we don't know them. They're hired from the outside. Yeah. And I started on a Tuesday, and the following Thursday they sent everybody home because of COVID. And so I had like basically 7-8 days in the office to get to even meet people before I was like, you're out, everybody go home. And it was really strange to kind of, how do I lead and how do I get myself known and how do I earn trust and through at that time with Zoom now, but it was like WebEx, the same thing,
Right. Yeah.
And it was just really challenging. And even when I would talk people at the coalition, they would like, how are you doing this? Because you're an in the room guy, you're like stand at the front and get people excited. Yeah. How are you doing this over Zoom? And it was like, it's not easy, like to try to figure this out and how to get people motivated and because I had to change like how we were doing production and all these sorts of things, and we're doing it, in a window. It's just crazy.
How did you overcome that? How long did it take to kind of sync with everybody? It
took a while, but one of the things I decided to do, because I'm kind of an open door manager.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to do is like, I said, you know what, I'm gonna try an experiment. You guys don't know me yet, and so let's just do the thing. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have like this sort of window, an hour that's open that people can come in, ask me questions, and go away, kind of thing. The way that if I had an open door, and so I was like Thursday at 11 o'clock. I'm going to turn on the camera and I'll sit there in this empty room and you guys can hop in and out and ask me questions, and I'll just, while I'm working, I'll talk to you. And so I was excited to do this and get people to get to know me. And so I'm like, all right, it's Thursday 11. Let me turn on my camera. 75 people were sitting there looking at me, waiting.
Whoa.
Yeah,
so I was expecting nobody to be there, but they were there. Wow.
Yeah, and so they're all, and so I'm like, oh, this isn't like come and ask me a question like onesie twosies. Like this is like put on a show for us for an hour. And so I had this audience of 75 people. So I was like, okay, well, I guess let's just talk. Yeah. And so every week, and so now there's like 250 people every Thursday show up.
That's awesome.
For the Zoom call. They ended up calling it we call it the Rodcast.
Yeah.
And
Trip Hawkins would do that with 3DO.
Really?
Yeah. We were there. It was like a weekly meeting with everybody. We were there shooting pieces there, and we got to be there on the day that he was doing it.
Oh, nice.
And it was really cool. And we did the making of Fallout 3, and Todd Howard did something similar where he'd fill up. It wasn't Zoom though. Right. It was all in this theater like this.
Right.
And I think there is a little bit of a show to it too, right? Like you have to lead the charge.
Sure. Yeah. And I it's mutated on very different things because I started it kind of just talking about like myself, but then I started interviewing people, the leadership on the team, so the other teams could. So I had a talk show for a while.
That's great.
And then I started because I didn't want to make it all about work, we started talking about pop culture. So I'd be like, what's your favorite anime? Or, what movies are you guys watching? And we would talk about this, and I would, complain about this movie plot thing or whatever. And it just became this sort of way to people to learn who I was and that I was being authentic and transparent. And so they could kind of get to trust me and not be going like, who's this exec? Because they're kind of used to execs being at arm's length.
Of course, yeah.
And that was hard for me, actually, because I'm at the coalition. I was not only the studio head, but I was the creative director.
That's right.
And so I was used to being in every meeting and hearing everything. And when I got to Blizzard, they were like, oh, you're an executive. You don't get to sit in this meeting. Yeah. Like, we don't want you in there.
Is that the culture at the company, at the team? Like, do they want your input on creative and stuff?
Probably not as much as they get. I've kind of found like I'll give feedback and stuff, but where I tend to focus is really on marketing. Yeah. And because that gives me
perception, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, just being able to be in the creative, like when we do trailers, like when you look at any of the vampire trailer we just did for season 2, or being able to be in that room and have that conversation around, is this the right thing? Are we talking, saying the things? And that's because when I was doing Gears, I was actually in the voice booth, like directing the voice actors and stuff, and helping to write the scripts and things like that. So I was very, very close to it, and so I still have that like creative urge that even though I'm sort of at a different altitude as a general manager, I'm like, but I still want to be in there. Yeah. So I've learned to like, okay, I have to be careful, because no matter how many times you say like I'm not the general manager right now, I'm one person giving you an opinion, it's still coming from Rod, and therefore it carries too much weight. Yeah. And so I've had to be really careful about how I say things, and say it when I really mean it kind of things.
Yeah.
Because I had a meeting with a guy who's like, hey, I was like, hey, how can I improve communications with you? And they're like, when you want something that you really want, could you just say that? Because I've done the thing where I'm like, hey, one person, I'm not the general manager, but I wish that was blue. And they're like, okay, cool. And then the next week the review would come up and it's not blue yet. And I'm like, I thought we agreed that was blue. And they're like, okay, if you just want it to be blue, just say blue, please, and we'll just do it. I'm like, okay, fine.
Yeah, and I guess that because I'm sure there's a lot of veterans of Diablo on Diablo 4.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah. There's people who've been there for more than a decade, or
right. So they're you on Gears.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right?
And so and it's been really it's been sort of very educational working with them and hearing the history and talking about like what it takes to make a Diablo game. And that's when I just realized that. Like in Gears, you could kind of have it all in your head, and that was the nice thing. And so that's when I got to Diablo. And
you can't have Diablo all in your head.
No, but
I don't know how one person does. Any one person have that?
Not really.
Yeah,
it's like because we have a class team and we have a loot team, and like so it's all kind of. And so that's some of the things like because of the combinations of this skill plus this class plus this effect plus this monster. That's why you get these little like ball lightning on the sorcerer right now. Like it's these things all come together that you can't necessarily test every permutation, and eventually the players do. And they go like, hey, I guess
like
what I just found.
Weekend.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I can now do 1 million points of damage, and you're like, oh, I wish we got time on that before we released it. That kind of thing. So yeah, but it's fun and it's a great the team is great, the culture is great, and the fact that they've just been continuing to execute at such a high level, it's been awesome to watch.
Well, the pandemic is one thing, and then there's also been other things that have been happening. How much has changed since you've been there?
Quite a lot. I mean, we've had some changes in leadership and changes on the team, and just different focuses from the culture side of it. And so I just think the team's in a really good place right now, and that's what's really exciting to see, kind of like what we were able to accomplish through not only the pandemic and all the other stuff that went on. We're still able to deliver Diablo 4.
And it's an incredible achievement. It is so much fun.
The team did just an amazing job, and I just think about what they had to accomplish, what they went through to accomplish what they did, and it's just phenomenal to me.
That's awesome. I mean, you're on a live service game, and you're a man that likes to ship things.
Yeah.
And you are shipping new content all the time in Diablo 4.
Yeah.
Do you think about a Diablo 5? Does that even come into the mind at this point?
Well, you have to always be thinking of the future. You have to think, like, because I'm like the general manager of Diablo All Up. So I have to think about not just like, what are we doing? What graphic novels are we doing?
Right.
And what statues are we doing?
Right.
And what games are we doing? And so you sort of have to look at that kind of all up. And so, of course you have to look to the future and go like, where's this road taking us? You can't just sort of go, da, 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 da. That's why I was joking with somebody because, we talk about changing our plans, and I go, yeah, it's a 5-year plan, but we don't just make it and then don't look at it for 5 years.
Right.
Like we have to revisit it every year.
Right. You have to make a new 5-year plan every year.
Yeah, exactly.
In a way, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's all, and again, it's about, what's happening with the game, what's happening with the players, and because does it make sense to do expansions forever? Maybe not. Does it? Where's that the right place to stop doing that, or how many more should we do? Like there's all the things you have to work on and think about. So when you think about what's next for Diablo, like sure, we always have to talk about it, but we're very focused on making sure that Diablo 4 is the game we want it to be, over time, especially as we're building towards this first expansion. Like I'm really excited about expansion 1, and it's got some going to that familiar jungles of Diablo 2, but it creates this sort of feel that's very different. Like when you play Diablo 4 now, you get the medieval feeling of and so that idea of getting to go to the jungles is going to be a nice sort of switch up of biomes, which will be fun.
I loved going to the ocean or the water, just
right.
and the waves lapping up and stuff. That was just awesome. So we waited a long time between Diablo 3 and Diablo 4. Would you guess that we'll have to wait that long for Diablo 5, or
no, that's not my intention at all.
Okay.
I think that's what I'm saying. I think with Diablo 3 we've learned our lesson about that was too long and not enough content. And so that's kind of, as we look to the future, we want to make sure that we're keeping the Diablo community fed for sure.
Right on.
And so plus I love shipping things.
And you love shipping things. That's established. Now Whoopi Goldberg is playing this game somehow. So somebody either got her a PC or she found a way to play it on the Mac.
If you know your way around a Google search, you can find ways to play Diablo 4 on Mac. Plus, they have there's a new emulation feature that they have
built
on,
right into the
to
Mac OS.
Yeah.
But will there be a true Mac version of Diablo? Is that something that you guys are?
It's a never say never.
Never say never.
Never say never.
Very cool. Well, Rod, I could just keep peppering you with questions you can't answer. And
I'm on vacation, Victor. Come on.
Congratulations.
No, thank you.
You're always a treat to speak with.
Sure.
You're one of the developers that understands what we have to do on our side and,
sure.
and just likes to communicate about stuff. And thank
I have
you for
to say,
being on the show.
I have to say, like, coming back to Vancouver, I'm in a period of mourning because I just found out Smoke's Poutineery is closed.
Yeah.
What the hell? Like,
pandemic, man. Everything has changed.
So where do I go for poutine now?
I don't know.
Really? You
Montreal.
don't have that is the correct answer. But in Vancouver, where do I go to?
I don't know. I can't help you, my friend. Where do I go for one of those cool jerseys?
So there's the gear store. We have a Blizzard online store, blizzard.gear.com, I think.
Okay, next time you come up with one of those for me, and I'll hook you up with poutine.
Oh, there we go. Okay, fine. Good deal.
Rod Fergusson, thank you, sir. Thank you so much, and congratulations to all of the folks at Blizzard and the Diablo team for making us Diablo 4. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back soon with some new content, and until then, play forever.